You can see the region that I was living in and the way that Palestinian territory has been sort of chopped up and compartmentalized by that wall. In particular, at the top left is the city of Qalqilia, a city of more than 50,000 Palestinians that has been completely surrounded by this 25-foot concrete wall, such that its outskirts look something like this now. These are the sniper towers, razor wire, and concrete wall around the Qalqilia city, also known as the Qalqilia ghetto now, or an open-air prison even. And very interesting is as a person of privilege in this part of the world, as an American, as a Jewish person, as a white person, I was actually able to see this wall from both sides of it. So here are photographs of the Qalqilia wall from the city of Qalqilia, the Palestinian side. Meanwhile, the next photograph I'm going to show you is a picture of this exact same wall from the Israeli highway that passes by on the other side of it. And I think this is very interesting. They've sort of built up on a slant up to the wall where they plant flowers in the springtime, such that it doesn't even look like a wall. And as I said before, many Israelis are much better informed about the situation than American Jews or Americans in general in this country. And yet at some point, I actually think that most Israelis probably don't even know what the wall looks like, where it's being built, what it's doing to Palestinian farmers and families. And this, to me, is almost a kind of censorship, preventing that message from getting across. And of course, censorship is something happening in our country as well. Here's a little anecdote. A friend of mine was flying back from Palestine to the United States, and she had a layover in Germany along the way where she picked up this issue of International Newsweek because it had a particularly sympathetic article about the plight of the Palestinians. You can see at the top there. And then she had another layover in Chicago on her flight home where she found this. Also Newsweek, August 2004, but the US version, with almost the same information, but one major difference. That article about the plight of the Palestinians had been completely removed from the entire magazine and replaced by one about the Olympics. And well, some people will tell you that's just because Americans don't care about the Middle East, but you know, look at the cover story. Of course Americans care about the Middle East. We read about what's happening in Iraq. We read about what's happened in Lebanon. This is a kind of censorship, and it's happening all over the place. We need to be aware of it. It's very dangerous, of course, because the very people who are paying for what's happening don't know what's happening. And so, you know, you don't have to take my word for it. I tell people, do your own research. You know, I didn't believe it when I first heard it. I did my own research, and that's what I recommend for other people to do. Now, another kind of censorship is just also in the wording. So, for example, instead of calling it a wall, calling it a fence. And, well, to be fair, in rural parts of Palestine, the wall looks like this. At its base is wire fence. But if you look a little bit closer, you'd find that this fence is not the kind of fence that you'd have like in your backyard kind of fence. Much of it is reinforced with heavy-duty electric wire and almost everywhere with razor wire. Back to the concrete areas. This is Abu Dis, a neighborhood of East Jerusalem. And what I want to illustrate here is that when you have a Palestinian built-up area and an Israeli settlement in the Palestinian territories, the wall won't be built, first of all, along the actual border, or even right in between the Palestinian town or village and the nearest settlement, or even sort of right up against the settlement to just get it onto the Israeli side. But oftentimes, in my experience, they'll build the wall as close as possible to the Palestinian built-up area so that not only the settlement, but all the land between the settlement and the nearest Palestinian town or village also ends up on the Israeli side. And this land, you know, it's not just pretty land to have a picnic on once in a while. This land is usually the land that farmers and families in surrounding areas have been living off of for generations or even hundreds of years. This is their livelihoods that's being taken away from them. One of the things I do with IWPS is actually accompanying farmers to their land that has now been stranded on the other side of the wall or checkpoints. And Israel says that although it's cutting off farmers from their land, it will allow them through at certain times with a certain kind of permit. Well, this is a man that I accompanied to the gate of the wall in hopes of getting to his land, and he had gone to acquire one of these permits to get to his own land. And he actually had papers as well dating back to the Ottoman era proving that he was the owner of that land on the other side, that he could see through but he couldn't get to when he wanted to. Well, we went together and we waited for 2 days, trying to flag down any jeep that would pass by, hoping that soldiers would let us pass, and they wouldn't. And this man, he didn't even want to go to pick his olives. He just wanted to go to be on his land. He said, I just want to sit under my trees, and he couldn't. So another thing that people are cut off from is each other. So sometimes if you have a house on the outskirts of a village, because they build the wall right up against the village, that house will end up on the wrong side of the wall. And that's exactly what happened to my friend Munira, who lives in this house. In front of it, you can see that 25-foot concrete wall separating Munira and her husband and their 6 children from their village, from their community. Behind the house is another wall separating the family from the nearest settlement. And on the right and left sides of the house are 2 more fences separating the family from their own land that has been annexed by Israel. So Munira and her family are basically living in a kind of cage. Here's the gate to the cage. You can see it's manned by soldiers, so people who want to visit Munira, whom you can see in the back with one of her kids, have to sort of hope that the soldiers are in a good mood and will let them through. Munira at this point hardly dares to leave her cage because she and her husband have been served something called demolition papers, which means that the Israeli army actually intends to demolish their home. And many people actually consider Munira sort of lucky because oftentimes if a house is in the way of an expanding settlement or road or the wall, they won't bother building a whole fence around it and getting a soldier to come man it, but they'll actually bulldoze that house. And so Munira is actually afraid to leave her house for fear that she could come back and it would be gone, not that they wouldn't bulldoze a house with people there, which they've done in the past as well. But anyway, here's a picture of the family. That's Munira on the left, her husband Hani on the right, and one of their 6 children. Well, Hani and his family actually originally came to Massa, the village where he lives with Munira, in 1948 as refugees of the 1948 war. The majority of the people living on the land that the UN designated for a Jewish state in 1947, the majority of the people living there were not Jewish. And Zionist forces actually expelled 750,000 Palestinians from their homes to surrounding areas in the West Bank and Gaza and in the diaspora. And Hani and his family, for example, were homeless for 10 years before they were able to finally save up enough money to buy themselves some land and build themselves a home. Hani says that he built this home with his own hands for his family. So just to keep things in perspective, what this demolition order, what this wall, what this occupation, what these things are doing are threatening to make Hani and families like his refugees for the 2nd time in recent history. Keep in mind that 60% of the Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza are already refugees, having lost almost everything already. So keep that in mind when you hear people say things like, Palestinians just aren't willing to compromise. And I don't know about you, but looking at this family and all the Palestinians I worked with during my time in Palestine, what I kept thinking was just, how long can people live like this? You know, how long can people endure this kind of a system before rising up, standing up for their rights, resisting? Well, of course, the answer is that Palestinians are and have been resisting for a very long time. We hear about one kind of resistance, violent resistance, suicide bombers that kill innocent Israelis. And people are always asking me, Anna, why are Palestinians always resisting with bombs? Why are they always strapping bombs to themselves, trying to kill as many Israelis as possible? Why don't they use non-violent resistance, like Martin Luther King talked about, like Gandhi talked about? Where are those things happening? Well, the answer is that Palestinians are and have been using non-violent resistance, not just once in a while, not just here and there, but literally almost every second of almost every single day of their lives. Just think about it for a moment. Think about Munira and her family. Simply staying in their home. Simply saying, look, you've taken our land, you've taken our freedom, but you will not take our home, is a kind of resistance, and it is nonviolent. This is nonviolent resistance. Think about the villagers of Yanun who've come back to their homes and their land. They know that they could be beaten up, they know that they could even be killed by the settlers, but they also know that it is their right to be in their homes on their land, and they're coming back to defend that right. This is nonviolent resistance. And in my opinion, any attempt on the part of Palestinians to maintain any kind of normalcy or dignity